Hello, and welcome to the Freedom Challenge online podcast. Here at the Freedom Challenge, we strive to do good by helping enslaved women and children to do more than you ever thought physically possible, and to do it together by connecting women with a heart for a hurting world. We hope you enjoy your time being informed, so let's get ready for this week's episode.
All right, welcome. I am Ruth Willett, the prayer coordinator of the Freedom Challenge, and I am here today to lead us in prayer for the issue of exploitation, oppression, and human trafficking. And joining together with what I believe my God is saying is, it is enough. Will you please join together with me as we raise our cry, no more, and even join in the cry of the sound of freedom that God's children are not for sale. Let's lift our voice to that. But I'm going to dive right in with a scripture. I'm just going to read it. It's Philippians 2, 8 and 9. And being found in human form, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. Therefore, God has highly exalted him and bestowed on him the name that is above every name. I've got it in a couple of different versions, especially verse 9. Therefore, God elevated him to the place of highest honor and gave him the name above all other names. Therefore, God raised him to the highest place and gave him the name above every name. The Message says, because of that obedience, God lifted him high and honored him far beyond anyone or anything ever, so that all created beings in heaven and on earth, even those long ago dead and buried, will bow and worship before this Jesus Christ and call out in praise that he is master of all. The highest place, I think, can show us the right hand of God. And I want to read out some things that can happen at the right hand of God. Psalm 89:13 tells us his right hand is strong and victorious. Psalm 98:1 tells us the right hand of the Lord has won the victory. Psalm 118:15 and 16 tells us that the right hand of the Lord does mighty things. 138:7 again in Psalms, his right hand deals with your enemies and saves you. Psalm 139:10, his right hand guides, strengthens, and empowers you. So let's pause here in thanksgiving and gratitude for who our God is. Maybe you want to just pray. Maybe you want to chat with a friend, but whatever it is, find a practical way to give thanks in this moment. Okay, so if you paused the podcast or you've paused this video, thank you for joining in that exercise. We've gazed on the one who's the name above all names, which is how I like to do this job and how I like to live my life. There are so many things trying to take our gaze in this world, and I believe God's invitation is choose to gaze on me and glance at the rest and see what I cannot do. So we've gazed on that name, the name that is above every other name. This means that human trafficking, oppression, exploitation, maybe even depression, maybe family pain, maybe financial suffering in this moment, maybe there's anxiety, death, whatever name is coming at you, because we are in a world where names are constantly coming at us. There is a name above them all, Jesus Christ, and that's who we're calling on today. The one who, when he died, went to hell and took the keys of death and sin, and it tells us he took captivity captive. So this is who I am calling on. This is who I'm inviting us to call on. And then we glance at all the other stuff because it requires our glance. It's important. We have to do it. We can't ignore it. I'm not inviting us to put our head in the sand. I'm just inviting us to take the only stance that will actually win. So, ladies, listeners, whoever is joining me on this video and this podcast, thank you for your yes. In some ways, it's a simple, uneventful, very ordinary yes. But I believe that your yes is life-changing for both you and for someone else. So thank you. I'm going to tackle a question that's often asked when we begin to talk about Freedom Challenge. which is, women taking on a physical challenge, doing good, doing more, and doing it together to highlight, to raise prayer funds and awareness into this issue of human trafficking. And, even I think this sometimes, so hey, no shame here, but really, hiking, what are we doing? Like, is it really making a difference? So I've written a couple of things down because I'm not always great at reminding us of these things, but does it really matter? Well, let me remind you what your yes has already done. Freedom Challenge has been going now for 11 years, so there's quite a lot of scope for testimony. We've raised awareness. People now know a little more of how to pray, of ways to act, of the need to give. I have created prayer content so that thousands of people have been mobilised to pray. Ladies who've come off Freedom Challenge hikes, they've worked with local organisations on the ground when they've come back. They've led prayer teams for years. They've adopted vulnerable children, even after working with women in their local community. They've noticed trafficking on a plane and worked with the stewardess to get help. They've seen laws changed, money pledged, women and children rescued, and men arrested in the areas where we've walked and where we've prayed. We've even seen presidents meet together and pledge to make tackling human trafficking a priority in their country. These are just a few of the things. So yeah, what your yes has been given in matters and is making a difference. So I don't know why hiking makes a difference, but I know that God takes our intentionality, runs with it and uses it, and we've seen it time and time again. So yes, I do believe that our steps matter, our prayers carry weight, and our God is fighting. So thank you for joining me. Let's now focus on one of the reasons that we're here, which is to face this issue, to bring awareness and to raise our cry with the cry of God, which I believe is it's enough. It's sadly without discrimination. It happens everywhere. Today I'm going to highlight Arizona because that's where a fiercely beautiful group of women are taking on a challenge soon. But I'm keeping it general because I just want to raise as many ordinary, everyday warriors as possible who choose to glance on this and gaze on the name above all names, because I genuinely believe we can change this and we can see this mountain of trafficking, oppression and exploitation moved. But Arizona, I want to spread this far and wide. I believe it's one of the greatest tragedies of our time. America, Arizona, is it really a problem? Is it really a problem in your state? Yes, listen to this. Based on data gathered by the US State Department, Arizona is a prime transit and destination area for both sex and labour trafficking in the United States. This came from the Department of Justice. They've identified Phoenix as one of the top human trafficking jurisdictions in the country. A report on human trafficking from the Office of the Arizona Attorney General's office states. This is where I found this information. They've sourced it from Trust, Training and Resources United to Stop Trafficking and the Phoenix Police Department Vice Unit. So I'm actually going to pause us here because I want us to stop now and pray for people in power and influence. I want us to say thank you for this Arizona State Attorney's Department that has put together a whole report on human trafficking. A thank you to the countries where the FBI and the law enforcement are working together and people of power and influence are changing laws and finding money and making things happen. And for those who are not, that God would turn their hearts. Because I do, as I said, believe this is one of the greatest injustices of our time because it touches everyone. And I wonder if not everyone is free, can we fully experience freedom? I don't know. That's a whole other discussion that we probably need to get into at some point. But pause and just pray for those in positions of power, influence, and justice. Okay. My heart's actually breaking here. I finished most of this podcast today and I've cried several times while looking more into this and reading stories. And I know the stats and I know the issues and I know how simple it is that it's people coming alongside the vulnerable and the isolated. Now, yes, there are certain social demographics where this is more obvious. They're very vulnerable because of poverty, because of families not being around, whether they've left or they have to work. But we're all vulnerable. We fight with our children and then they go and take influence from friends who maybe they're friends, maybe they're not. And I'm not saying any of this to scare you. I just want you to start reading a little and become informed and so that you can pray. But as I said, this is a glance. I am not going back to read any of these articles anytime soon. So I'm informing myself and then I'm like, okay, God, like I am placing this at your feet where you say you put your feet and make your enemies your footstool. Because all I would do would be create a huge level of anxiety in anyone I spoke to and in my own heart if all I did was focus on the stories of how easy it is in school, even in colleges, in parks, in social media. The traffickers are educating themselves. They know what they're doing. They are spending years making people friends, girlfriends, boyfriends, I don't know. So all I know is that God wants us to educate ourselves and then he wants us to go, but you're a name above even the educating of human trafficking. And I will not let fear come and take my gaze. My gaze will stay on you because you've already told me what you can do at your right hand. And for those of you who in this moment are like, well, if God really is all of that, why am I seeing this? Does he really care? My statement to you is that's a great wrestle. I would encourage you to wrestle it on the lap of a good father, Abba, the God of Jesus, the Father of Jesus, because the enemy will want to answer that question. And the world, with wisdom that isn't always wisdom, will want to answer that question. But Jesus gave his life on the cross, took captivity captive. He sits down in the dirtiest of places because he became a human so he could do that. And sometimes I think we blame him for the mess because he's really dirty, because he's not afraid to come and sit with us. And I just feel like God would love you to wrestle out that question with him. But for right now, maybe take my answer that yes, he cares. And I don't know why he doesn't move quicker. I would love him to move quicker. There are so many spaces and places in my life where I'm like, really, God? Again? This is really slow. Can you accelerate my healing? And his answer is almost always, will you give me time? And I kind of roll my eyes, get a little snarky like my teenage daughter with Jesus, and then go, fine, I will trust you and I'll trust your timing. And I think that's what we need to do here. But what I want to do is I want to give you the prayer that God first gave me and asked me to ask you to pray when I first took on this job in 2018. He said, ask the ladies, and I know that this is going to go out wider. So, men, if you're listening to this, is a great question for you. But ask the ladies, are we praying for the men? And then God went on to say, men are keeping this going and men will be the ones to help end it. Just like the radical conversion of Saul to Paul in the Bible, I am praying for the Sauls to become Pauls. I think in God's economy, this is the norm, not the extreme. Sometimes I look at the life and conversion of Paul and think, well, he had half the world to take the gospel to and, explain who Jesus was. But God was like, this is just my normal. This is what I do. And so the Pauls changed to Pauls, the radical conversions, they're not extreme. They're just what the hand of God can accomplish. So how we need to see the men rise up and to see the women and children used and abused, to see the children enslaved. May God raise up men and women with his eyes and his heart, that the traffickers become the rescuers, the ones that know all the ins and outs, all the routes, all the spaces and places, that they would become the ones who begin to share with the FBI and the law enforcement and the officials and the judges. This is how it's been done, and this will help you end it. Let's pray for that. So let's pause here. And if you try and say something and your voice is like, ugh, I cannot pray, this is appalling, these men are appalling, then maybe just groan or choose a worship song, because in the Bible it tells us that the Holy Spirit knows how to take our groans and work with even them. So I am not telling you to do this because it's easy. I'm telling you to do this because it will change it. So this is my prayer challenge to you. So let's pause here, look up and talk to God about what we've just heard. I have a song suggestion because when I said yes to this, which I've referenced before, God took me to 2 Chronicles 20, and all these armies were coming against Jehoshaphat and Judah, and they were terrified, rightly so. So if you're scared of this, that's okay. It's a scary subject. We need to know what to do with our fear. And what they stated in that chapter was, we don't know what to do, but we'll put our eyes on you. Are you not still the God who holds power and might in your hands? And God's response was, yeah, look to me. He, through a man, said, this is my fight, not yours. And then they worshipped. And the worshippers went ahead of the army to face the battle. And that's what we're doing here today. We're facing the battle, not ignoring it. And as they went ahead, God set the ambushes and won the battle. So I worship a lot. That's my prayer in this arena, is worship. And there's a song. My song suggestion is Name Above All Names by Charity Gale. Because when we worship, God fights. And I've seen it in my life. I can testify, and testify means do it again, God. So you can take that testimony and run with it if you're not sure, if it sounds a bit cookie. And you can write to Freedom Challenge and ask questions that I will happily answer. Because I don't believe we can fight darkness with darkness. Sounding very Martin Luther King here. You can't fight hate with hate. Love has to be involved here, and the love that I know that is a love that changes things is the love of Christ. And this is dark, not trying to pretend that it's not. I'm actually going to give you some statistics here which you're going to hate. I mentioned the human trafficking resort from the Arizona Attorney General's office. They made a statement, which I've now lost, but hey, I'm just going to look around and find it. But they made a statement that said, human trafficking, Arizona's not buying it. And I want us to pause and say yes and amen to that statement. And hey, I hope you're praying from different states. I hope this goes worldwide. So put your own country in there, put your own city, your own state. I'll say Atlanta's not buying it. Talking of trafficking, in the US, the state's government Trafficking in Persons Report 2023 said that 63% of clients serviced used within the US were US citizens or lawful permanent residents. I know some of us want to believe that it doesn't happen here, but it does. So thank you for keeping your eyes open, for saying yes. It's often as simple as traffickers keeping their eyes open and inserting themselves into the vulnerable situations, which I've already mentioned. They are the ones who begin to offer help and pretend like they're friends. So let's pause now. Pray that God would give us the strength to love with our eyes open and to move with our hands and hearts postured to bring Jesus to this world. May people find us ready to help, ready to get dirty when we need to get dirty, making the traffickers unnecessary. Wouldn't that be amazing? I'm just going to say this again, which a few of you have heard me say if you've listened to me before, but the day of against trafficking in persons is the same day as International Day of Friendship. Imagine if the true friendship that we carried, the friendship of Christ, the friendship of being a good human, was what ran this world. I think we may not be talking about human trafficking, but we are. So back to that report, it says the average age of entry into the sex trade in Arizona is 14 years old. So, come on. If you haven't decided yet whether you need to pray about this issue, isn't that reason enough? Law enforcement has seen girls as young as 9 sold for sex. And many factors that make Arizona a popular tourist destination also fuel the sex trafficking activity, and that includes their geographical location, close proximity to the border, interstate highway networks, warm weather, a home to an array of conferences and sporting events, which doesn't make human trafficking happen more, it just brings a large amount of it to your city. It's still happening every day, all day, probably 24/7. Being a part of a region with many other tourist destinations, including Las Vegas and San Diego. But don't forget, this doesn't discriminate. It happens everywhere. So you don't need to go, well, I don't need to pray for my space. I would invite us to send it to at least 3 friends, not because I want to become famous, because I want us praying, because I know it's making a difference. Maybe you can send it to 20. Let's raise an army of ordinary people saying it's enough. Because shouldn't we be saying it's enough? The average age of entry, 14 years old, right? If you've got kids, just let yourself think about that for just a minute. And now I think we need to gaze, not here, for sure not here. So I don't know if you have a favourite worship song, this would be the time to bring it out. If you don't, I'll go for some oldies and goodies that I have mentioned a lot. Turn Your Eyes Upon Jesus. I love the Lauren Daigle version of that. All I Need by Rita Springer. There's so many songs. There's Power, or Your Name is Power by Rend Collective. Fortress by Kingdom Something Worship. Gratitude by Brandon Lake. There's some songs to bring our gaze back to the name above all names. Amen by Charity Gale. Man, that's a powerful song. Holiness has a name and it's Jesus. Forgiveness has a name and it's Jesus. I actually want to talk about Arizona last year. We had a freedom challenge and I just spent an hour chatting to one of the participants the other day, and it was great. Like, I love getting to hear the testimonies, see how God's working. I love that God is big enough to deal with this issue of human trafficking, and yet personable enough that everything he does is for the one. And you're that one, by the way, whether you know it or not. I'm that one. I'm his favourite. But of course, we're all his favourite. But Maria, she did the challenge last year. She did it because she loves to hike, and she did it because putting positive energy out into the world matters, doing things that make a difference matters. She did not want to listen to my podcast. None of this Jesus stuff, right? Like, she chose to listen to music. But the thing is, Jesus knows how to find us, fight for us, recklessly love us in the best possible way. And I had written a personal note for everyone that I felt was what God was wanting to say to them. And these were randomly just laid out at the top of the mountain. And Maria got a note that just pierced her heart, where God just showed her that he saw her. I don't know her. God's just that good that he loves everyone and loves to tell us how much he loves us and what ways he loves us. And it really was simply just God saying, hey, I actually want you to shine bright. I've made you to shine. I've made you to shine me. I think you're pretty great and I love you. And I'm sure there was more. I don't remember because I forget pretty much as soon as I've written it. But God doesn't. And what happened was it was nothing major. She was touched by that. Got to have a celebration dinner with her and just enjoy getting to know her. And then God just began to move, and the catalytic moment of God meeting her on the mountain just kind of moved the veil a little bit, that when other people began to move into her life and go, hey, God sees you, he's pretty good, he loves you, he gave Jesus for you, whatever it was, whatever space people came into to just love her a little, just brought her to a space of God seeing her and God bringing a deeper level of love and healing and freedom into an already beautiful life, but a life that desperately needed him. And so you're listening to this, I hope this year you're happy to listen to my podcast, but you're on the trail walking, and I just believe that testimony means do it again, God. And Maria is on the trails with you, and her testimony is, we are trusting in a God who sees the one. God has a name that means the God who sees. It's El Roy, and he came to a slave woman who had been used for sex in Genesis as that name. It's the only place in the Bible we're told he comes with that name. So this issue, we might be praying for 50 million enslaved in the world right now, but God's eye is on one, and God's eye is able to be on you as the one, and he's still providing the urgent rescue of others. I mentioned rescues and people freed. When we did the relay in the John Muir Trail, there was rescues all along the points, at certain points where we were hiking. There was laws changed, money pledged. When they came down the mountain and when they went to Everest Base Camp way back at the beginning when we started, so it was probably something like 2013, the little village where they kind of touched down into, there was a sting operation and there was women and children rescued. So God knows how to see the one. God freed me in a freedom challenge as I was looking out the mountains, kind of hating who I was. And God had been trying to pour his love into me, and I was like, that's too much. And there was something about that, yes, that freedom challenge where God brought freedom to my life, but he still brought freedom and rescue to people in desperate need. So God he's not like us. He's not limited like us. He doesn't move like us. So I want us to pause here and let it be about us for a minute, because God always lets it be about us, because he's just that big and that good and that kind. So just pause for a minute here and thank God for Maria's testimony, where God just radically pursued her, because that's what he does and who he is. And maybe there's someone here who doesn't know him, or does know him, but isn't really sure he's that good or that kind, or that they deserve his attention. So I just want us to pause here and just, with that space, let's just hold the tension of that space. I've been a Christian pretty much my whole life, and I've felt all those things. So let's just hold the tension of this space and just invite the God of all peace to speak. He actually created us. He's made us to hear him. And it might be the mountains, it might be the trail, it might be the person walking beside you, or it might be just this inner voice where you have to just pay attention. And you think it's a weird thought of yours, but if you pay attention to it, you would never think that. That could be God. And he'll confirm it if it goes like that, because that's what he's always done for me when he's been teaching me. So I'm going to stop talking so we can actually pause. The theme of the year is the heart of pilgrimage. And the verse is Psalm 84:5. Blessed are those whose strength is in the Lord, whose hearts are set on pilgrimage. One version says, in whose hearts are the highways to Zion. And when I was talking with Maria, whose testimony I just shared, one thing she said, which I thought was interesting because it made me think of the word vigil, maybe a little differently. But she said, walking the Freedom Challenge last year felt like walking a vigil with a focus on the oppressed and the vulnerable. And somehow, without really understanding, just knowing that our set focus and set aside time in our steps, we're doing something. And I loved that. I loved the thought of the word vigil, even though I don't think it fully fits, maybe it also totally fits. Like, the vigil kind of makes me think of when Jesus said, when he was facing the cross, and he said to his disciples, will you stop and pray for a moment? And they fell asleep. So the vigil would have been, if they could have stayed awake throughout the night, they would have been keeping vigil with him, keeping watch. But there's also a vigil that talks about taking vigil and going through the stations of the cross. And that is movement. So although vigil often seems like it's just in the night or it's stillness, I think it's just so much more than that. And this practice of setting our attention and our focus on challenging something that needs challenged, or sitting with someone who needs us to sit with them, or just being in a moment that needs us to be there. And I did look up the definition of vigil: a stationary, peaceful demonstration in support of a particular cause. We're not stationary, but we for sure are peaceful. And if you've listened to the Peace podcast, it's all about how active and powerful and life-changing, in fact, world-changing, the peace of God is, and how it brings fragmented, fractured things back to wholeness one step at a time. And I pray that that's your experience on this trail, that your steps are bringing wholeness in your life, but they're also bringing wholeness to this issue of human trafficking. So let's pause again and just invite the Prince of Peace to speak a little into his peace, and even into what our steps are doing. And if you hear something, share with one another. I'd love that. The other thing I loved about Vigil is it seems to really fit the theme of pilgrimage. And I think Freedom Challenge has been a pilgrimage without me fully realising that we're setting our focus and we're setting our attention. We're setting aside our time to give our focused and intentional yes to something that matters. And the thing I love about it is that pilgrimage is so often like just this desperate need to be still and to go to a destination that miracle signs and wonders are happening, or some major spiritual event took place. And this verse that says, whose heart is set on pilgrimage, I just see the smile, and I think pilgrimage is great. So if that sounded like I was knocking it and it wasn't important, that is not what I feel. Pilgrimage, I believe, is a beautiful thing, but I also believe that our hearts are set on pilgrimage. We have the highways in our heart because Jesus has paved a way, and we're not grasping at maybe I'll get something from here, and even if we are, he'll meet us anyway. But we have this truth that the one who took captivity captive has trailblazed the path that we need to walk on, and he's before us, behind us, above us, below us. He's at the end of our life journey, of our pilgrimage, cheering us on, going, you're going to make it. I've provided everything you need. And to me, it's how he's met us in Freedom Challenge all the time. So I love that we have this theme, which is a 2-year theme, by the way, of the heart of pilgrimage, because I feel like it's just going to take us even deeper into who God is for us, what he's always really done for us. And when we begin to gaze on that and choose that, we just, it's when you get a car and all of a sudden you're seeing those cars everywhere. I think when we set our heart on this and set our heart on the fact that Jesus is just all over us, all over our journey, all over our choices, all over our life's path. He has a version of our stories that he's desperate for us to see. When we begin to focus our attention on that, and at the same time do it for others, for the freedom of others, we're just going to see all the ways that he's been doing it for so long. So my prayer for us now, as we end this, because I could talk forever, but my prayer for us is that we would see it, that we would see all the ways he's been all over us from the beginning of our life's journey to now, and all the ways he's set things in place for the future, and all the ways that us choosing to focus on that will somehow be a part of bringing freedom to others. Because it's never just about us, but it is about us, so that when he says, hey, go and love others like I've loved you, we actually have that love in us to give out, because we've let him love us. We've taken the time to make it about us so that we can make it about others. And I know you hear me say that all the time, but it's worth repeating, right? I want to remind you of a few things I've asked you to pray for the men. When you're like, well, God surely means this person, but not that person. The Florida podcast in 2023, there's some good, tough stories in there about praying for the men. You could go and listen to that. But here's the thing, Saul and Paul, Saul who was converted and changed his name to Paul in the Bible, he was like a terrorist. I mean, he stood watching Stephen being stoned and he was pleased. The Christians were terrified of him because he was killing them. And I'm pretty sure it was brutal. That's who Jesus saved, because he knew what he needed him to do, but also because he just loved him. And I've heard some stories of some of the men who do this, and quite honestly, they're just broken, hard stories. And I'm so glad that my God is the one who's the judge, because he knows what to do. Even this, he knows how to bring this to right, to wholeness, one step at a time. So I've asked you to pray for the men. I've asked you to care about the fact that in Arizona, the average age of entry into sex trafficking is 14. I've asked you to believe your steps matter and your prayers carry weight, and share this podcast. I've asked you to worship. He is fighting. God's children are not for sale. And we're all God's children. May he open our eyes to just how much he loves his kids. So that's what I've asked you to do. And I'm saying thank you for your yes. Thank you for doing this walk. Maria, thank you for your testimony and sharing it with me. Ladies, thank you that you keep saying yes over and over. Thank you for believing with me that God is doing something. Please don't stop praying. Even if all you do is choose one song for 1 month and go, God, I'm going to make sure that shuffles onto my playlist every week, and that is my prayer. I am telling you, that is my prayer for human trafficking. Don't think that anything's too small. So thank you for joining me. Thank you for listening and hearing about the Freedom Challenge and hearing the way that we're coming together to do good, do more, and do it together, because we need community. Thank you for believing the ways that God is working for this issue. Don't forget to believe them for your own life. I am holding on to it for my life right now, I can tell you. So thank you. And as I said, I'm Ruth Willett, the prayer coordinator of the Freedom Challenge, and I am thankful for you all. Take care.
Thanks for listening to the Freedom Challenge online podcast. If you liked what you heard, join the fight to set women and children on a pathway to freedom across the globe. We are a proud ministry of Operation Mobilization USA and encourage you to learn more at thefreedomchallenge.com and omusa.org for how you can get involved. Follow us on Facebook, on Instagram at the FCUSA, and don't forget to subscribe and leave a review to let us know what you think. We'll see you next time.